My name is Grace. I never thought I'd find myself in this position, but here I am, sharing a story I never thought I'd have to tell. Maybe you're wondering why I'm doing this. Maybe you're here for the drama, or maybe, just maybe, you're like me, looking for answers. If you think my story's worth hearing, hit that subscribe button now, because trust me, you're going to want to hear the rest of it. I had everything. Or at least, I thought I did. I was beautiful, ambitious, living in London, working at a job I loved. Life was perfect. But then, I met Dominic. He walked into my life like he owned it, sweeping me off my feet with his charm, his smile, his confidence. At first, it felt like something out of a dream. I'd never met anyone like him, handsome, always well-dressed, driving a car that screamed wealth. He didn't just want to be with me, he wanted to take me to a world I had only seen in movies. Exotic vacations, dinners at the best restaurants, designer clothes. It was a lifestyle I didn't even know I could have. But there was someone else. Someone I had known my whole life, James. He was the quiet type, always there when I needed him, but never in the spotlight. I never noticed him the way I noticed Dominic. James had been my friend since childhood. He knew everything about me. He'd helped me through heartbreaks and bad days, never asking for anything in return. But now, there was an emptiness between us that I couldn't ignore. Dominic kept drawing me in with his grand gestures, lavish dates, surprises I never saw coming. And all the while, James was on the outskirts, watching quietly, his feelings unspoken. Maybe it was selfish of me, but I was blinded by the world Dominic promised me. I didn't even think to wonder about what James was going through. All I saw was the fairy tale in front of me. But then, something happened at a dinner party, something I didn't see coming. I overheard Dominic talking to someone in private. They were speaking in hushed tones, but the words that cut through the noise were enough to shake me. We need to make sure she doesn't find out about the debt. I thought I was living a dream, but now I wasn't so sure. It started with the small things. The little inconsistencies I kept brushing off. Dominic would tell me he was going on a business trip to some far-off country, but when I asked for details, he'd become evasive. He'd change the subject, or give me vague answers. I told myself it wasn't important. After all, who was I to question the man who had given me everything I ever wanted? I had built this perfect fantasy around him, and I wasn't about to let anything ruin it. James was still there, of course, always in the background, always watching. He kept offering his advice, warning me about Dominic. Be careful, Grace. Sometimes people aren't who they say they are, he said, looking at me with those eyes that had always been so full of understanding. But I laughed it off, telling him he was just jealous. The truth was, I didn't want to hear it. I couldn't. Dominic was everything I had ever dreamed of. Then came my birthday. Dominic planned the most extravagant surprise party. It was all for me, champagne, expensive gifts, friends, laughter. The whole world felt like it was spinning around us, and for a moment, I believed in every word Dominic said. But I could feel James watching from the corner, his smile tight. There was a sadness in his eyes that I couldn't ignore. And the tension between him and Dominic was palpable, though I failed to see it then. The party winds down, and as the last of the guests leave, Dominic and I find ourselves alone in his private suite. The air is quiet, but there's a charge in the atmosphere, something between us that feels both intimate and intense. The soft flicker of candles casts a gentle glow around the room, making everything feel surreal. Dominic takes my hand, his touch warm and reassuring as he leads me to the balcony. The cool night air wraps around us, but his presence feels like enough to keep me warm. As we stand there, the city lights flickering below, he looks at me with an expression I can't quite read. You look breathtaking, he whispers, his voice low and sincere, sending a shiver down my spine. The way he says it, with such intensity, makes my heart race. He brushes a loose strand of hair from my face, his fingers lingering longer than necessary, and for a moment, the world outside feels like it doesn't exist. I feel my breath catch as he leans in, his lips brushing gently against my forehead. The tenderness in that moment makes my chest tighten, and I close my eyes, lost in the sensation. I've never felt so seen, so adored. When he pulls back, I find myself smiling, my heart full, and yet, there's a small voice whispering doubts in the back of my mind that I push away. His hands slide gently down my back, pulling me even closer, and my thoughts vanish into the warmth of his touch. For a second, everything else fades, the party, the people, the world. It's just us, in this moment, and I feel something real. Later, as the night draws on, Dominic walks me to the door. I feel a rush of emotions: fulfillment, excitement, contentment. I can't deny how good it feels to be with him, to be wanted. But even with all the warmth inside me, I can't shake the lingering feeling of unease, the doubts that I try to ignore. Later that night, as we were clearing up, I found a receipt in Dominic's coat pocket. It was for a loan from a private lender. My stomach twisted. "What's this?" I asked. Dominic's answer was quick, smooth. "It's just an investment," he said. But that uneasy feeling didn't go away. Still, I pushed it aside. There was no way he'd lie to me, right? Then James spoke up. I never expected it. "Grace, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice barely a whisper. And then, the words that broke my heart. "I love you. I always have." The day I confronted Dominic was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I had the receipt in my hand, my fingers trembling as I held it up in front of him. "What's this, Dominic?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but my heart was racing. His eyes flickered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "It's nothing, Grace," he said, smiling that smile that made me feel weak. "It's just a little hiccup with my business partners. You know how it is." He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me close, his warmth washing over me. I wanted to believe him, I needed to. The doubts were there, gnawing at me, but Dominic was so convincing, so charming. I let it slide. I couldn't risk losing him over something so trivial, could I? The seed of doubt was planted, but my love for him was louder than my suspicions. James, on the other hand, had started to pull away. The warmth in his eyes had faded, replaced by a coldness I couldn't understand. He wasn't there for me anymore, not in the way he used to be. When I tried to reach out, he would barely respond. I could feel the distance growing between us, and it hurt. I didn't know what had happened. Why was he acting like this? Then, one afternoon, I overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I was passing Dominic's office when I heard him on the phone with a banker, his voice low and strained. "You don't understand, I'm drowning in debt. I can't pay this off." My heart sank. But I couldn't confront him, my emotions were too tangled up in him. James and I met for coffee a few days later, and that's when the truth hit me. "I can't do this anymore, Grace," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've tried moving on, but I can't keep watching you fall for Dominic, knowing he's not the man you think he is." I felt guilt flood through me, but I pushed it aside. My feelings for Dominic were too strong to ignore. Yet, even as I sat there, a small, nagging doubt lingered in my mind. It was on a rainy Thursday afternoon when I overheard Dominic on the phone in his office. His voice, usually smooth and confident, was filled with frustration and anger. "You promised me this would work," he snapped into the receiver, his words harsh. "Now look at what's happened. This whole thing's falling apart, and it's your fault. I'm not paying for your mistakes." The conversation ended abruptly, but the damage was done. The cracks in his perfect facade were becoming impossible to ignore. I'd heard whispers of his failed ventures before, but this was the confirmation I needed. Dominic was hiding the truth from me, everything about him was a lie. I knew I had to talk to James. He'd been right all along, and I hadn't listened. The guilt of pushing him away was overwhelming, but I needed answers. When I met him, I expected him to be distant, angry, but instead, he just looked at me with such quiet sadness. Without saying a word, he handed me a folder. Inside were screenshots of bank statements, emails, and photos of Dominic with people who had warned him about his financial troubles. "This is what you've been missing, Grace," James said softly. "He's been lying to you from the start. His wealth is a facade." I felt the ground shift beneath me. My stomach churned as I tried to process what I was seeing, but something inside me refused to believe it. It couldn't be true. Dominic was the love of my life, wasn't he? But Dominic wasn't going to let go so easily. His grip on me tightened. He started to isolate me from James, convincing me that my friendship with him was toxic, that James didn't have my best interests at heart. I felt suffocated, confused. I wanted to escape, but every time I tried, Dominic was there, pulling me back. I was torn. My love for him battled with the cold reality of his lies. But I couldn't shake him off. The weight of it all pressed down on me, and for the first time, I was truly lost. James wasn't giving up, though. He found me one last time, his voice desperate. Grace, you deserve better. Please, see what's happening. But I couldn't. I couldn't see it. My heart was tangled in Dominic's lies, and I couldn't find my way out. The morning I stumbled across that bank statement, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I had been cleaning out the drawer in Dominic's office when I found it hidden beneath a pile of paperwork. It was a bank statement, marked with high-interest loans, unpaid debts, and strange transactions. My hands shook as I scanned through the numbers. It was all there. Dominic had been using me to pay off his debts. Not only that, but he had planned to marry me for access to my inheritance, something I hadn't even considered. The weight of the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. I confronted Dominic immediately. His calm demeanor shifted as soon as I mentioned the statement. He tried to deny it at first, but when I pushed harder, his mask finally slipped. He admitted everything, his voice dripping with cold honesty. I never loved you, Grace. You were just a means to an end. A rich girl I could manipulate to cover my debts. You were a stepping stone to the life I always wanted. His words stung more than anything he could have done to me physically. My world crumbled in that moment. Every kiss, every promise, every gesture, nothing had been real. I couldn't stop the tears from flowing. I felt humiliated, empty, and utterly alone. But then James appeared, like he always did when I needed someone. He didn't say much at first, he just pulled me into his arms. I'm so sorry you had to go through this, he whispered, holding me close. I had never felt so lost, yet at the same time, I felt the comfort of his presence. I ended things with Dominic that day, telling him that I was done. He could never manipulate me again. But as I tried to pick up the pieces of my broken heart, I learned something that tore me apart all over again. James had known the whole time. He had been the one to expose Dominic's lies to me, and he had kept it a secret, waiting for me to figure it out. My heart shattered in a different way now. Was James just playing the hero, or was there more to his silence? Would I ever truly be able to trust anyone again? The weeks after Dominic were a blur. My life felt like it was constantly shifting under my feet. At first, there was this emptiness, a hole where the lies had been, and I didn't know how to fill it. I wasn't sure who I was anymore, or if anyone could ever truly love me. But James, steady and constant, had been there. He helped me take the first steps toward rebuilding, slowly earning back a little of the trust one had lost. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. One evening, as we sat together, James looked at me with a seriousness I'd never seen before. Grace, there's something I need to tell you, he began, his voice low. The words that followed hit me like a punch to the gut. He admitted that he had known from the beginning that Dominic wasn't right for me. He confessed that he had deliberately manipulated the situation, guiding me toward the truth about Dominic. I had to make you see it on your own, even if it meant hurting you. His voice trembled slightly, but his gaze never wavered. I was furious. My mind raced with questions. Was this really love? Was everything, every moment, orchestrated for his benefit? I confronted him, my heart burning with confusion. Did you ever love me, James? Or was this all just a game to you? His silence was deafening. The weight of his actions hung in the air like a dark cloud, and I wasn't sure if I could breathe. Then, just as I was starting to process his betrayal, I stumbled upon the final blow. James had known everything. He had been in on Dominic's scheme from the very beginning. I couldn't believe it. The person I had trusted most had been playing me from the start. The phone call that came next sent chills down my spine. Dominic had left the country. Just like that, he was gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was coming, and that maybe the worst betrayal of all had just begun. I walked away from James, my heart shattering in pieces. And as I did, I could feel his eyes on me, full of unreadable emotion, leaving me questioning everything. Did James orchestrate everything, or was there another twist in the tale? Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications to find out in the next episode. Leave your thoughts in the comments below.